What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Full house today. Matthew Moreno, Daniel Starkand, Scott Geirman, all joining us as we are looking ahead to the playoffs, and specifically today talking Dodgers starting rotation. And guys, the conversation I want to have is, how do you rank the Dodgers starting pitching options? We know game one and game two are either going to be Miller and Kershaw in some order, and then you get to a game three, and we're talking Lance Lynn, Ryan Pepio, maybe Yarbrough, maybe an opener, maybe Emmett Sheehan. So that's the plan for this little quick show here. Let's start with game one and game two. And Matt, I'll start for you. As I said, Dave Roberts has been pretty clear. Bobby Miller and Clayton Kershaw are the two names in contention. In your estimation, Matt, who would you start at game one if you were in charge?
At this point, I would go with Clayton Kershaw. And if you asked me a couple weeks ago, I was on, Bobby Miller, because Kershaw, after his start against the Marlins, like, the velocity was down. He was walking a bunch of guys. Like, it was just all bad. And then, he's sort of stabilized and rebounded a little bit. Obviously, the velocity hasn't picked back up yet, but I think he can give you 4 innings, maybe 5 innings of, potentially 1 or 2 runs allowed, if not, a scoreless outing like we saw from him this last time. And I think the Dodgers have sort of telegraphed it a little bit in terms of the schedule he's been on. And Kershaw himself joked that he's the college starter. He's the Saturday starter, like in college. And so if you look at, he started this past Saturday. His final start of the regular season is going to be Saturday this weekend against the Giants. And that lines him up to then start again on Saturday, which, lo and behold, happens to be game 1 of the NLDS.
Daniel, the math adds up, as Matt said. We know the production for Kershaw, 7 earned runs in 7 starts since coming off the injured list. Some would say that number is a bit misleading versus what we've actually seen and who the pitcher is. But for you, is Kershaw still your game 1 starter based on what we've seen over the past few weeks?
I still think Kershaw's the game 1 guy, and it's more just because that will line him up to start a game 5. And I know it's possible that you could get through the NLDS with only 3 starters, but it seems like the Dodgers are counting on having 4 starters. So it would set Kershaw up for a potential game 5. And I know, like, even though Kershaw's nowhere near 100%, but I just think in a game 5 winner take all at Dodger Stadium, he's the guy I would want on the mound. Like, Bobby Miller has been, really good, but there's no playoff experience there. You don't know how he's going to be in a playoff setting. So I just think starting Kershaw game 1 and then setting him up for a game 5, makes sense.
Yeah, look, I've got Kershaw as my game 1 starter as well. Anybody who's watched the show knows that I've been on that train for the past few weeks and have not wavered. So I feel vindicated a little bit. Scotty, you want to zag here and go Bobby Miller, the guy who could potentially give them 6 innings, which Kershaw has not done since coming back, or are you going with the GOAT in game 1?
No, I mean, it's a lot of what we said is that with this new version of Clayton Kershaw, whichever he's doing, he's, pitch mix, subtle diminished velocity, it's okay. Like we're giving him that landing strip to figure it out. And it's cool that I feel like we're all kind of aligned right now. It's kind of all come back to this, that Clayton Kershaw's, for me, he's moved himself right back into the 1 spot. I like it because for myself and I think for the Dodgers, and I know you guys will agree, it just gives them a lot of, like, if he does need a little bit extra time, putting him in that game 1 slot, it allows them to, look ahead again. You get that good game 1 start, and they're able to maneuver their way around that. And I think that for me, I would be as comfortable with how he's looked his last 2 outings. He looks confident. The slider looks solid. He's putting it where it needs to be. And it was the biggest worry was his location, and he's figured that out. And he looks confident up there. And I like seeing that fire when he does misfire on something. He's right there where I'd like to see him be.
Matt, I'm curious. I want to ask you, because Daniel mentioned that he's kind of projecting a 4-man rotation, or at least a 3-man rotation with a bullpen game in game 4. I had just in my mind that this would automatically be a 3-man rotation because they could go on normal rest. Of course, Kershaw is now getting extra rest in between every start. So game 1 would be October 7th and game 4 would be October 12th. So you'd have a full 4 days off in between game 1 and game 4. Are you leaning towards what Daniel is, that game 1 starter would be your game 5 starter? Or are you thinking they'd go game 1, game 4, and game 2 and game 5?
Yeah, that's what I'm not convinced that they would start Kershaw a second time in the NLDS. And it's tough to say because obviously if your season is potentially on the line,
Yeah.
How are you not sort of going with Clayton Kershaw, even if, he's, like Scott said, he's not the, his dominant self that we are so accustomed to seeing throughout his career. But man, like, he hasn't started on regular rest once since coming off the IL in the second half. So, like, on one hand, again, it's the playoffs and it's a little bit different than the regular season, because if you theoretically lose, you could potentially go home. On the other hand, like, is he capable? Is he just not capable of starting on regular rest at this point? And I'm leaning that way. I don't know if that would be enough. I don't know if there's a scenario though where they tell Kershaw, like, "Hey, sorry, you can't start on regular rest. Like, you're only like." I think he would say, like, "No, like, I haven't done it, but I can still do it. Like, give me the ball," type thing.
Yeah.
But as of this moment, I'm leaning towards he doesn't start a second time. Whether he's the game 1 starter or game 2 starter, I think we only see him once in the NLDS. And I would recommend that the Dodgers just take care of business earlier than later in that series, so that you just avoid this potential decision anyway.
And it is worth noting that holding Kershaw out of that game 4 start would also set them up better for the NLCS and beyond, which we know this team is not, it's not all chips on the table just to win the NLDS. You're trying to win a World Series. And so if, for example, the NLDS were to go 5 and everybody pitched on normal rest, then whoever we're about to decide our game 3 starter is your game 1 starter in the NLCS, which is maybe not how you want to open that one potentially against the Braves. So let's jump ahead to game 3. And we'll go reverse order. Scott, I'll start with you on this one. I've got Lance Lynn and Ryan Pepiot as the 2 names here for a potential game 3 start. Again, you can make a case for Emmett Sheehan. You can make a case for a bullpen game if you want to go Ryan Yarborough. I mean, get as crazy as you want to, Scott. Who's your game 3 starter if you had to decide right now?
Of course, things depend on, if we have to lock in the rotation at the moment, like just, without knowing what happens game 1, game 2. I'd really like to see Ryan Pepiot there, but Lance Lynn, he went out and he missed a ton of bats, and I'm just going to, give you one and the other. I'm not going to let you know right now, but Ryan Pepiot. No. I'm saying Ryan Pepiot. I wanted to give you a little bit about both, but I want to see Ryan Pepiot. I really want to see what he's got. I loved, the way he's pitched. He's pitched with a lot of conviction. His stuff's playing way up. And Lance Lynn, it's been a mixed bag. Ryan Pepiot has only shown us so many starts, but his one little blip was small, and it wasn't like he got shelled out of the water. I'd really like to see Ryan Pepiot there. I don't have much more about that. He's just shown a lot for me. He looks confident up there. Stuff that I believe will translate well. High velocity. His stuff looks sharp. I really like to hear what Daniel has to say about this, because I know he's got a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's a fascinating conversation, Daniel, because on one hand, you've got Pepiot, who's never pitched in a big spot like this before, who has had a shortened season. And yet 6 starts since coming up. He's allowed just 6 appearances since coming up, 7 earned runs. He's allowed just 23 hits in 33 innings with a 26-3 strikeout to walk ratio. Those numbers are all insanely good. On the flip side, you've got the veteran Lance Lynn, who, if we're being honest, his last 3 starts have been better. 7 earned runs in his last 3 starts, 6 strikeouts apiece in the last 2, 16 hits in 18 innings. I mean, so the numbers have been better for Lance Lynn, and he's the vet. He's the proven guy. He's the gamer, etc. Daniel, I'm asking not what will the Dodgers do. I'm curious, if you were in charge, would you go Lynn or Pepiot?
Well, if you want to ask what I would do if I was in charge, this order would be completely different for me personally. Okay. Like, I think back to what I said earlier, why I think they're going with the 4-man rotation is because Kershaw is lined up for game 1. To me, what I would do is I would save Kershaw for game 3, and then you could get through with a 3-man rotation, and you're not pushing Kershaw to pitch on 4 days rest, which is normal rest, but he's been on this week-long schedule. So if it was up to me, I would have Bobby Miller in game 1 and Pepiot in game 2. You got the 2 young guys who have no playoff experience. You're starting them at home, and then they'll be ready for games 4 and 5 on regular rest. And then Kershaw gets game 3 on the road, which would line him up potentially for a game 1 in the NLCS, depending on how the schedule goes. So if it's up to me, that's how I would do it. Lance Lynn would not pitch in the NLDS. You have your 3-man rotation. You have a full bullpen, ready to go. So that to me would be the best way to do it. But I think the fact that Kershaw's lined up for game one tells me at least that they're going to go with a 4-man rotation, or maybe what Matt was saying is correct, and Kershaw only pitches game one, and then he's ready for game one of the NLCS, and then you still have Bobby Miller for games 2 and 5.
Yeah.
But either way, you're going to need Pepio and Lynn, whether they're starting or if it's Lynn, he would start. If it's Pepio, maybe they have an opener or Yarbrough or something. But you have those guys for games 3 and 4. I'd go Pepio game 3 and Lynn game 4. But if it was up to me, I'd go with the 3-man rotation and leave Lynn out of it completely.
Matt, I really like what Daniel just said. That makes a ton of sense to me as far as the health goes, as well as, I'm a Pepio over Lynn guy personally. If it were up to me, I'm curious. None of us think that's going to happen, to be clear. Like, we're all expecting Kershaw and Miller. They've already said Kershaw or Miller are starting games 1 and game 2. And Dave Roberts isn't necessarily a guy that lies about stuff like that, even if maybe we would like him to be a little more coy at times. Matt, in your estimation, based on how we see this playing out in game 1 or game 2, Lance Lynn or Ryan Pepio, who would you send to the mound in game 3?
I would do Pepio, but I think they're going to go Lynn.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is like, with Kershaw, like we said, you probably really can't count on more than 5 innings. So you're going to need your bullpen in that game. Bobby Miller, you hope can give you 6, but we have seen, big innings sort of get away from him. And so what if he is out after, 4 1/3 or 4 2/3 or, 5 innings, and you're going to need your bullpen again in that game. And Lance Lynn, like we said at the time, like you guys said at the time of the trade, they got him to eat innings, and he has done that in some regard. I think it's come still with the pretty frequent home run issue, and so that would be interesting in the playoffs. But I see it being Lynn, even though I would do Pepio. And what's going to be interesting is I don't think Pepio starts. I think they probably end up using an opener, whether he's game 3 or a game 4. I think they probably go opener and then let him pitch, which I don't necessarily know if I would do. I think he's pitched well enough as a starter, like just let him start, in my opinion. But that's splitting hairs at that point.
I was expecting Matt, the traditionalist, to give me the vet, give me Lance Lynn, give me the guy, the gamer. Screw these rookies, screw these young guys, no playoff experience. And
I was right there with you.
Young guy.
No, there's been I've seen one too many Lance Lynn home runs in person to attach my wagon to him.
What's there been, like 45 of them this year?
I was just gonna say,
was the one too many.
Yeah, well, Lance Lynn stopped counting after 30, so did I.
So in July, you stopped counting?
Pretty much.
Let's close with this and give a prediction. We'll close with a prediction of how the pitching staff plays out. And I'll go first so I can give you an example, because I'm going to include some piggybacks in here. I think game 1 is Kershaw and Emmett Sheehan. I think game 2 is Bobby Miller and Ryan Yarbrough. And I think game 3 is Lance Lynn, if I had to guess, with maybe a Ryan Pepio sort of piggyback. That's how I see those 3 games playing out and going from there. Matt, if you had to make a prediction, do you agree with that prediction, or would you shift things up a little bit?
No, I could see that playing out. I feel like you took my script and stole it, so we can co-author that one.
Daniel?
I definitely think that makes sense, although I wouldn't be so certain about the piggybacks. I think that'll more have to do with like what's going on in the games. Like, I think there's enough off days where you don't really need any piggybacks in the NLDS. Like, you have game 1, then an off day, game 2, off day, 3, 4, off day, game 5. So like you could get through it with just your normal bullpen. So I think if, let's say, Kershaw gives you 4 or 5 good innings and you have a 1 or 2 run lead, I don't think you're going to Emmett Sheehan in that situation. I think you're just going to your normal relievers, and then you have the piggyback guys for whenever there's a lopsided game either way or whatever. But yeah, I think what you said as far as the starters makes sense, and I do agree that they probably will use an opener for Pepio, whether it be Lynn starting and Pepio behind him, or if they split him up in games 3 and 4. I still think Caleb Ferguson, for example, would start whatever the Pepio game is.
Yeah, Scott, Daniel makes an interesting point, because if you've got, let's say, guys that you trust on the back end being Evan Phillips, Joe Kelly, Ryan Brazier, Brusdar Graterol, maybe Caleb Ferguson, realistically, if your starter can get you 5 innings, there's no reason that you can't go to 4 of those 5 guys basically every single game in the NLDS. Pitching every other day shouldn't be a problem, especially if you're only asking them to get 3 outs. So how do you see it playing out? Do you think they sort of aim for a piggyback, or maybe just those guys are available in reserve, but it's more so hope you can get 5 and then just hand it to the pen?
Yeah, I think, they'll have to manage this a lot on game feel. I think this will be as tough of a year for them to script prior than they've had in quite a long time. I think that if Ryan Yarbrough is, pitching well and he has the opportunity to give them, multiple innings instead of just a short thing, they'll do that. They'll, go off of how he's looking. But the second, he starts to get hit, you got to, you have to pivot off of that. But what he's able to do is give them, 3, perhaps 4 innings. And if he's rolling, absolutely let him go, because then that just, sets you up more for the next game. So just like you said, you're able to give unleash your entire arsenal there. But I think they're going to have to manage this exactly on how, it's looking in that moment. They're not able to, roadmap to 27 outs this like they've done in recent years, because it's just a patchwork job, and they've got a lot of young arms out there, and they're really going to have to figure it out. But I'm excited, man. It's a little bit nerve wracking, but they've got a lot of firepower. So I'm curious to see how they handle the situation. But I really think that they're going to have to manage based on feel, how everybody's
Dave Roberts, baby, making gut decisions.
Yep, I know. Nobody wants to see it.
Get ready, folks. Starting in the 4th or 5th inning. Get fired up. That's Matt Moreno, Daniel Starkand, Scott Geirman. My name is Jeff Spiegel. Make sure you're checking out DodgerBlue.com for all the latest Dodger Blue 1958 right here on YouTube. Subscribe, ring the notification bell. Tons of content coming even throughout the wild card series. We'll have an NLDS preview once that series starts to wrap up. Tons of content coming. So enjoy the rest of your day, folks. And of course, as always, go Dodgers.